Hello and welcome to another advanced skeleton video. In this video we're gonna take a closer look at rigging of props. Now, as you might know, advanced skeleton takes a input joint chain called a fit skeleton, and from that builds a complete rig called the advanced skeleton. Now, you might be most familiar with fit skeletons being imports of one of these templates. But these templates are simple joint chains that just have been saved out, and you can create your own from scratch. Now let's demonstrate by using the create joint tool and create the simplest possible rig, a single joint. Now with this joint selected, we can proceed by clicking on the Build Advanced Skeleton button. This has now built a one joint rig, and it contains the basic controllers that comes with all advanced skeleton rigs, which is the main controller that sits on the ground, and also the root controller, which sits at the location of the top joint. Now if we want to expand on this prop rig and make it a little bit more interesting, we can just toggle fit advanced. That'll take us back to the fit skeleton and go to the create joint tool, and I'm gonna go into the side view and start out by using the existing joints and adding a few more joints. And if we now hit rebuild advanced skeleton, we can see that we're getting a more interesting prop rig. Now the controllers are a bit big, so I'll scale them all down with this function here. Now another thing that's quite useful for rigging of props is the driving system, which we'll find in this section under pose. Driving systems allows us to quickly create attributes that drives one or more of the controllers. Now, for example, if we wanted one attribute that would change this pose to look something more like this, then we first set the pose we want and hit create driving system. Now this has detected all the attributes that we've changed, and we'll make a name for the attribute and a controller. And now we get a new controller with an attribute called bend that drives this prop into this pose. Another example of a driving system, we can see if we open the sample prop, the skateboard, which is done by opening the demo section. If you haven't yet downloaded the demo assets, you can do that through this function. Now here we have all the sample assets up to date. So we'll just go ahead, select the skateboard and open it. And here we see that the driving system has an attribute called side to side that banks the skateboard from side to side and also applies the appropriate rotation to the skateboard trucks. Now let's go ahead and take a new prop and rig it from scratch. Now what we got here is an axe. This happens to be Conan's axe. A Conan is a sample character that you can open from the demo section. So there's the demo character. Now back to rigging up his axe. So we'll just use the create joint tool, and we'll make our first joint right about here where he's likely to grab on to the axe. And we'll set the second joint right up here, which will set the direction and the length of the bone. Now this is going to be a one joint prop. So we'll just make sure this joint's selected and hit build advanced skeleton. And we can scale down the control curves. And we'll select the geometry. And in the form option 1, plus select the form joints and set smooth bind. And we have a simple one joint advanced skeleton rig for this prop. We'll put the model inside the geometry group. So we'll have the single top node in the outliner. Now let's take a look at how we can provide alternative pivot points. Now this controller right here might be quite good and useful for a attachment point where the hand will grab onto the axe. But let's say, for example, that in our animation The character will be picking up the axe and throwing it, and as the axe flies through the air, we want it to spin around its center of gravity, which is not going to work very well here. We're going to want a pivot point that sits much higher, probably somewhere around here. Now this is just a locator, so we can see where we would like the pivot to be. So what we could do at this point is go back to the fit skeleton and just add an additional joint at the alternative pivot point position, right about here, and rebuild the rig. So now we got two controllers. The original one is still here and the second one is now up here. However, currently this doesn't move the axe at all. That's because the axe is still bound to the top joint. But we can quickly fix that by selecting the joint and add it as an influence. And we'll flood the weights to the new joint. So now we have our option to pick up the axe and grab it onto the main handle area, and the axe can also rotate around its center of mass. Now let's have a look at another way we can deal with alternate pivot points. Let's say we also wanted this axe to have a pivot point right at the top of the axe, around here, and that could be because the animation required the axe to end up in this way, and we have wanted to have a pivot here, so we are able to grab the axe and spin it around on its head. Now this time, instead of adding an additional controller here, I'll show you how in animation that you can make a controller have a alternative pivot point. Now this is done with a function in the selector tool called SwitchPivot. Now the way SwitchPivot works is first you gotta tell the tool where you want the alternative pivot to be, and this we can do by just creating a locator and positioning the locator right where we want the pivot point to be. Now with the locator selected, we shift click to add to the selection the controller, and then we'll go ahead and run SwitchPivot. So what's happened now is that this controller is still at the pivot that it used to be. However, if we now hit the up key on the keyboard to pick walk up, the extra controller has now got its pivot up here. And we're now able to do what was required in the shot with the axe being planted on the ground upside down, and we wanted to spin it around on its head. Now the SwitchPivot tool works on pretty much any of the advanced skeleton controllers and can be a handy way of providing alternative pivot points in animation. Now that's it for this time. I hope you have enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time.